The mansion was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan above Evelyn Harper's head. Outside, the sun was dipping behind the manicured gardens, painting the sprawling estate in shades of gold and crimson. At 67, Evelyn should have been slowing down. Most people her age would be content sipping tea in a sunroom, scrolling through their social media feeds, maybe complaining about creaky joints. But Evelyn wasn't most people. She sat in her wheelchair, insulin pen in one hand, the other tracing the outline of her long, swollen foot. 10 years. 10 years that ulcer had been a relentless reminder of mortality, a ticking clock in the form of skin and tissue that refused to heal. Doctors had told her there was little hope. The odds weren't just against her, they were astronomical. Statistically, less than 1% survived her combination of diabetes, chronic infection, and systemic weakness. But Evelyn Harper wasn't statistical. Most people fold under pressure, she whispered to herself, her voice a calm but firm cadence. Not me. Her eyes drifted toward the grand staircase. Her son Michael would be home soon. The man had charm, sure, smooth, articulate, capable, but underneath that polished veneer was a mind hungry for control, for money, for power. He saw Evelyn's illness not as a tragedy but as an opportunity. And he wasn't subtle about it. In the kitchen, Claire, Evelyn's daughter-in-law, was arranging a tray of evening tea and snacks. Claire had a soft presence, the kind of warmth that could melt tension in a room before it became a storm. She moved quietly, carefully placing items just within Evelyn's reach, always alert, always protective. Claire had an intuition Evelyn valued more than most. She knew when to speak, when to intervene, and when to step back. Evelyn's gaze returned to her foot. The bandages were fresh, sterile, but fragile. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the infection could spiral. Her body reminded her that survival wasn't guaranteed, it was earned day by day, decision by decision. This wasn't the first time Evelyn had faced what felt like insurmountable odds. She'd fought through serious infections in her 20s, survived a car accident that left her with fractures doctors deemed career-ending, and endured years of health setbacks that would have broken a lesser spirit. She didn't just survive, she thrived. And tonight, as the first shadows of dusk slanted across her sprawling estate, she vowed she would thrive again. The doorbell rang, a crisp, sharp sound cutting through the tranquil air. Evelyn's heart rate spiked, not from fear but awareness. Michael. She knew the man well enough to anticipate both the charm and the edge. Claire opened the door first, her posture calm but alert. Michael stepped in, suave as ever, suit perfectly pressed, smile just bright enough to disarm anyone not paying close attention. "Evening, Evelyn," he said, his tone buttery smooth. But Evelyn heard the undertone, the calculation, the impatience, the greed masked as pleasantries. Evelyn smiled back, slow, deliberate. "Evening, Michael, how's your day of empire building?" He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Evelyn caught it instantly. There it was, the plan he always carried when he walked into a room. "What can I get? What can I take? Who can I manipulate?" Claire handed Evelyn her tea. "Relax, Mom," she said softly. "You've earned it." Evelyn took a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread through her body. She allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The estate, the gardens, the artwork, everything was hers to enjoy, hers to defend. Michael's ambitions could reach as far as he wanted, but there were rules, even in families driven by greed. Evelyn had learned them all, painfully and meticulously. Later, as Michael wandered toward the study, Evelyn adjusted the bandage on her foot, winced at the pain, but didn't falter. Claire noticed, hovering silently, offering reassurance without words. "She's stubborn," Claire murmured under her breath. "Stubborn and unbreakable." Evelyn's mind wandered to her childhood, a time when resilience had been drilled into her through struggle and expectation. Wealth had given her privileges, yes, but it hadn't shielded her from challenges. Every failure, every hospital visit, every close call had honed her into a strategist, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with. And tonight, as shadows lengthened across the marble floors, she was ready. Michael returned to the room, casual, confident, but Evelyn had noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. He lingered too long near her medication cabinet, eyes flicking, calculating. Evelyn's heartbeat didn't quicken. Instead, a calm awareness settled over her. She had survived worse, way worse, and she wasn't about to be caught off guard now. Her survival instinct had always been paired with observation. She watched the flicker of his expression, the way he tapped his fingers, the glimmer of ambition that bordered on obsession. Claire stood slightly behind, silent sentinel. Evelyn appreciated her more than words could capture. Together they were not just family, they were a shield. Evelyn leaned back, letting the cool evening air wash over her face. "Some people survive because they never stop fighting," she said aloud, almost to herself. "I survive because I refuse to fold." That night, as the estate lights flickered on, casting golden halos over marble floors and polished wood, Evelyn Harper's mind was sharp, her determination palpable. She wasn't just living, she was preparing, strategizing, plotting for every eventuality because in a world of wealth, betrayal, and illness, survival wasn't optional. It was an art. And somewhere deep down, she smiled. The odds were high, the stakes were higher, but Evelyn Harper had never been one to let odds define her story. The moon hung low over the Harper estate, casting a silvery sheen across the manicured lawns and marble terraces. Inside, the grand chandelier glinted faintly, refracting light across Evelyn's room. She sat poised in her wheelchair, legs covered with a soft cashmere throw, fingers gently brushing the edge of her foot bandage. 10 years of chronic pain had taught her every twitch, every twinge, every subtle signal her body gave. Tonight, however, the signals weren't subtle. Something felt off. Claire moved quietly by the bedside, refilling a water glass and checking the temperature of Evelyn's evening tea. Her presence was steady, unshakable, a silent guardian in a house filled with ambition and secrets. She had noticed the way Michael had lingered near the medication cabinet earlier, the subtle shift in his manner that betrayed intent. Claire didn't speak. She simply stayed vigilant, eyes scanning, ears attuned to the smallest sound. Outside, a soft shuffle echoed through the hall. Michael, dressed in a dark jacket, tiptoed toward Evelyn's room, pretending the noise was nothing but a misplaced shoe. He smiled to himself, calculating. Tonight was the night, he thought. One tiny misstep, an altered dose, a spiked supplement, and Evelyn's life could tilt irreversibly. He didn't anticipate Claire's sharp instinct. She had intercepted a misdirected hand toward the insulin pen and gently moved it back onto the tray, unnoticed by Michael, her expression composed yet alert. Evelyn, though outwardly calm, felt the tension in the air like electricity. Every fiber of her being sensed danger, a prickling awareness that had become second nature over decades of survival. Her mind raced, not with fear but strategy. She had faced near death before, battled relentless infections, strokes of fate, hospital warnings that would have crushed most people. Survival, she realized, required more than sheer will, it demanded calculation. A knock on the door startled them briefly. Michael froze, adjusting his demeanor instantly to charm. "Evening, Evelyn," he said, voice smooth, almost casual. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She studied him quietly, noting the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch in his fingers. He was predictable. Greed and arrogance always betrayed themselves eventually. Claire whispered, barely audible, "He's testing you." Evelyn's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Let him," she murmured. "I've outlasted worse." Hours passed in subtle suspense. Michael's movements were measured, deliberate, but Evelyn's intuition was sharper than ever. She recalled the countless times she had turned the tables: medical crises, social betrayals, financial threats. Each memory fortified her, reminding her that resilience was as much mental as physical. Suddenly, Evelyn's insulin monitor beeped, an alert she was dangerously low. Her body shivered, her vision blurred momentarily. Claire acted instantly, placing her hands around Evelyn's shoulders and guiding her carefully to a reclined position. The crisis passed within minutes, but it left Evelyn acutely aware of how fragile life could be, and yet, how fiercely she clung to it. The foot ulcer throbbed mercilessly, reminding her that her body carried wounds beyond the immediate danger. But Evelyn's mind was alive, alert, and untouchable. She visualized the estate as a chessboard, each family member a piece with predictable moves, and she was the player who refused to lose. Later in the study, Michael's frustration simmered. Claire had managed to divert his subtle manipulations, and Evelyn's vigilance rendered his plans ineffective. He clenched his jaw, realizing the subtle genius in Evelyn's calm demeanor. He was up against someone whose survival instincts were honed sharper than any blade. Evelyn, aware of every shadow, every whisper, plotted silently. She began leaving subtle clues, safe but visible, to track his intentions without exposing herself prematurely. She had learned long ago that knowledge was power, and patience could dismantle even the most cunning adversary. The night deepened, the mansion quiet except for the occasional creak of wood and the soft hum of distant traffic. Claire sat near Evelyn's side, a comforting presence. Evelyn leaned toward her, whispering, "Keep your heart steady. Danger isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, waiting for the right moment." As the clock approached midnight, the tension reached a knife edge. Michael's calculated risks became bolder, yet Evelyn anticipated every move, each step choreographed in her mind. The lessons of past illness, past betrayals, and past near-deaths converged, equipping her with a clarity that was both frightening and awe-inspiring. By the end of the night, Evelyn had not only survived Michael's subtle attack but had laid the groundwork to expose him. Her body was weak, her foot ulcer still pulsing, yet her mind had never been sharper. She had turned the tables on a predator hidden in plain sight, demonstrating that true strength isn't measured in muscle, but in courage, foresight, and unyielding will. The first light of dawn broke over the Harper estate, brushing the mansion's marble terraces with gold. Evelyn Harper sat in her wheelchair near the tall windows, the cool morning air brushing her face. Her body still bore the marks of chronic illness, the stubborn foot ulcer, and years of high-dose insulin, but her spirit was unyielding. Today, everything would change. Michael entered the room, confident as ever, or so he thought. His plan had grown bolder overnight, fueled by frustration and greed. He assumed Evelyn's weakness was obvious, that her years of illness had left her vulnerable. What he hadn't counted on was Evelyn Harper's mind, sharp, deliberate, and strategic, honed by decades of surviving what most people would call impossible. Claire stood by the doorway, calm but alert, her presence a quiet warning. "Mom," she whispered, "he's testing you one last time." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Let him," she replied. "I've been ready my whole life for this." Michael moved toward the medication cabinet, hands twitching toward the insulin tray. In a single fluid motion, Evelyn spoke, her voice steady but commanding. "Stop, Michael. That's enough." The words carried the weight of authority, experience, and unbroken resolve. Michael froze. For the first time in years, he sensed the shift. The predator in the room was not who he had assumed. Evelyn's gaze pierced through him, sharp and unrelenting. He saw in her eyes a truth he could not deny. She would survive, not by luck, not by chance, but by sheer will and intelligence. Claire stepped forward. "Your schemes end now, Michael," she said, her voice firm. "No more threats, no more manipulations." The courage in her tone reinforced Evelyn's presence, creating an unspoken alliance that was unbreakable. Evelyn's mind raced, piecing together every clue Michael had left behind, every subtle hint of his plan. With a calm precision, she guided Claire through a subtle maneuver, moving medications, leaving evidence of Michael's tampering in plain sight, and simultaneously ensuring her own safety. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. Michael realized too late that he had underestimated her. His frustration became panic, his control slipping through fingers that had always grasped so tightly. Evelyn, despite her frailty, exuded a commanding energy, an aura that only those who had faced death repeatedly could possess. Minutes stretched, heavy with tension, until the final confrontation unfolded. Evelyn leaned slightly forward in her wheelchair, calm, eyes steady. "This ends now," she said. "You've gambled with my life long enough. The world doesn't reward greed, it punishes it." Claire watched, heart pounding, as Michael's arrogance crumbled. He stumbled backward, realizing that every manipulation, every attempt at control had been anticipated. The mansion's silence held their collective breath, awaiting the inevitable reckoning. When Michael finally faltered, Evelyn's victory was subtle but absolute. Law enforcement arrived shortly after Claire discreetly called them, armed with the evidence Evelyn had meticulously arranged. Michael's schemes were exposed, and for the first time he faced consequences for his actions. Evelyn, still seated in her wheelchair, allowed herself a moment of relief. Her body was battered, yes, but her mind was intact, her spirit untamed. The estate around her, grand halls, manicured gardens, priceless artwork, remained hers to protect and enjoy. She had survived what most people would consider insurmountable: decades of chronic illness, near-death episodes, and a betrayal from the one person who should have cherished her. Claire approached, placing a gentle hand over Evelyn's. "You did it," she said softly. "You survived." Evelyn smiled, eyes glistening. "No, Claire, we did it. Strength isn't just mine, it's ours. Courage isn't about avoiding danger. It's about facing it and refusing to break." The morning sun streamed into the room, bathing Evelyn and Claire in light. The mansion was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in years, the air carried the weight of victory rather than threat. Evelyn's foot still throbbed, her body still demanded care, but the psychological triumph was undeniable. She had reclaimed not only her life but her legacy. Later, as she wheeled herself through the estate, Evelyn's thoughts drifted to those who might never have survived similar trials. Her story, she realized, was one of inspiration. To anyone watching, listening, or reading her journey, adversity is inevitable, but surrender is optional. Fight, endure, and claim your life no matter the odds. In the garden, the roses she had planted decades ago flourished in the early light. Evelyn paused, fingers brushing the petals. Wealth, she thought, was not measured in dollars or estates but in resilience, love, and the unshakable courage to face life unflinchingly. She had survived diabetes, infections, betrayal, and near-death experiences, yet here she was, a testament to endurance and human will. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, the sprawling estate shimmering in the morning glow. Evelyn Harper, elite, resilient, and unstoppable, had turned the final chapter of danger into a narrative of triumph. And somewhere in the quiet corners of that mansion, hope spread. A legacy was secured, courage had won, and Evelyn Harper's story would endure, not as a tale of illness or betrayal, but as a shining example of unbroken will, human strength, and the relentless pursuit of life against all odds.